How to piss off half-truthers and people who ignore the history of the United States. Quote it. This is all for all of you. In God we trust. Under God. Second Amendment people. 1776, September 28th. Pennsylvania Article 13. That the people have a right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state of Pennsylvania. Oh. Guess you're SOL, Texas. Standing armies in the time of peace are dangerous to liberty. I agree. This has been parroted, repeated, and found out about. If you're going to decide that you're going to quote something, find its origin story. Right to bear arms phrase first instance concerning the United States that is known. There may be earlier ones. And yes, the intention was defense of themselves and defense of the state. Now you either have to make this a Federalist statement, so it's the defense of the United States, or of the state of Pennsylvania. We're going to be putting all of you in a nice little box today. Standing armies ought not to be kept up, and that the military should be kept under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. They used a specific set of words here. How many of you knew this? 1776, September 28th. When was the Constitution and the Second Amendment written? Federalists support the Constitution as it was ratified. If you're calling yourself a traditionalist that wants to use the Constitution, then you're a Federalist. Anti-Federalists didn't. They supported states having more power than the federal government. They do not support the Constitution. If you're a Johnny Reb, if you're a person who has decided that the federal government shouldn't rule anything and you want Pennsylvania law to apply, states' rights means anti-federalist. Federalist means you support the Constitution. States' rights means that you prefer to weaken it. You have an untenable situation when you quote the Constitution while stating that you want to weaken the federal rulings. And then you requote them as necessary. Everyone puts anything on an Etch-a-Sketch they want. Every law is convenient if it's what you want. Otherwise it has to be ignored. We're also going to talk about some more history here. Very uncomfortable history. Let's talk about other times. Much more fun times. When was the U.S. Constitution and the Second Amendment actually created? You have to go look that up. You have to go look up the original, actual written copy of it and read the frackin' thing. Let's start. We're not going to do that. We're just going to skip ahead to the revisions. But it's in the Constitution. Which revision? Did you know George Bush was running the presidency at the time when one of the revisions happens? That doesn't mean he was just insanely old at the time. 1788, February 6. May the Constitution ever construe to authorize Congress to infringe on the just liberty of the press, or the rights of conscience, or to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. This was a question that was put to the committee or whatever at the time. Federal. Remember, if you're an anti-federalist, you don't want the result because you want it to be anti-federalist and not support the Constitution and give the states all the power you can because they all have their own constitutions. The reply, which became part of law after the discussion, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, but no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person. If you have a religious restriction, you don't have to serve, because you have a rule that you have that contradicts, that says do not kill. Oh, 1788. It was a reply to whether or not the Congress should have the ability to prevent peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. If you go on YouTube and talk about murdering people, you're not a peaceable citizen. So now you're under a restriction where you get your arms taken for speech, because they would have done that immediately. If YouTube existed at the time, most of you patriots wouldn't be allowed to have a gun. You wouldn't be allowed to have a pocket knife or a pickle. This was a reply to a request. Should Congress have the right to change liberty of the press, rights of conscience, and prevent people who are peaceable from having weapons, keeping their own arms? In 1788, it's a frontier country. We just got done with a war. Who with? Did you look it up? Every blade of grass has a gun behind it. Was the fear of a soldier who had experienced the wrath of America. What kind of guns? I'm in favor of people having the right to keep and bear arms, provided that they build it, prove they can operate it, and not be a dumbass. You know, trigger discipline. No dumbasses should own a gun. Period. Why? Because you're dumb. Same argument I have about congressmen and senators who can't quote that it's a magazine, not a damn clip. It's a firing pin. Do you know it's called a firing pin? Do you know why it's only on some guns and not all of them? Do you know what a hammer is? Build a gun. Then you can have one. Next. That was a reply. You're quoting a reply to a question. It's the answer, but it's not the question. It's not an affirmation. It's a reply to a specific type of question. Anyway, July 28th, 1789, after July 4th. A well-regulated militia composed of the body of the people being the best security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, but no person religiously scrupulous, blah, blah, blah. Do you get it? They just quoted it again. A well-regulated... later. Well-regulated... Same thing. Next. Shortened. 1789, September 4th. We gotta move along here. A well-regulated militia being the best security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Free state. You're anti-federalist. You're against the Constitution. You're in favor of state constitutions. Or of the state. Then you're in favor of the U.S. government as the state. You have to pick which king you bow to. Your state or your federal. If you're going to do states' rights, you're against the U.S. Constitution overruling states' rights, which means you do not have the right to keep and bear arms unless your state specifies it at the time, because you're deciding the oldest version is the best version when it's convenient. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, yada yada again. 1789. The purpose of the Second Amendment was to prevent new federal government's powers from disarming the state militias run by and regulated by the state as state defense systems. We call them the National Guard now, but in the National Guard states factually this is what it was from. This is the origin story for the National Guard. Do I have to do a video on that? And replacing the National Guard with a federal standing army, which is inefficient and stupid, as we already know. That's why we have National Guards, to help in state activities. Each state can help each other. It's a better way of delegating things. Look up speed tree. Next. It was a concern that was relevant a few years after the birth of the country because the federal government wanted more power versus the state, and representatives didn't like that, so they integrated into the federal government's laws to regulate them as an anti-federalist thing. Irony. And a good thing. It's about militias in the 1790s and the anti-federalist fear of a federal army because they didn't want to be ruled under a different kind of king. William Lambert revision. Yes, the person revised it. And no one bitched about it. A well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary to the security of a free state, comma, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, comma, shall not be infringed. You're going to see that again, aren't you? 1876, U.S. government versus somebody. The right of each individual to bear arms was not guaranteed under the Constitution. This was a decision. And it was 1876. Yeah. You want to know why? You want to know what etch-a-sketch this was put on? Why it was put on? Because it was a court case in favor of and a decision for the desire of a group of people to take away the right to keep and bear arms. What group? The KKK. When it's convenient to certain groups of people, they're willing to restrict the right to keep and bear arms dynamically and state factually it never granted anyone the right to keep and bear arms. Oh, and I wonder what political and social group the KKK is most aligned with. You might want to look up what Democrats used to be. Remember, stuff changes. I did a video on that. Yeah. So shall we just say conservative or liberal? Why is liberal evil? But hey! Or is it just butt straw? Man. 1886, Presser versus Illinois. The Second Amendment only limited the federal government from prohibiting gun ownership, not the states. States can do anything they want to. States' rights. Now suddenly you're all federalists. 1894, Miller versus Texas. Second Amendment does not apply to state laws, like Texas restrictions on carrying dangerous weapons of any kind. You don't have a right to do anything you want to. It was restricted per state and per city and county. Oh, wait a minute. We'll be getting to that. U.S. versus Miller. In the absence of any evidence tending to show that possession or use of the item we're talking about has some reasonable relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia in 1939, we cannot say the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear such an armament. In this case, it was a sawed-off shotgun. Depending on where you were, it was legal, by the way. And then it wasn't. 1948, under God was added, because it was attributed to Lincoln, to many things. 1954, no one succeeded in jacking it into something specific until a pastor preached to Eisenhower. But hey, the Francis Bellamy 1892 Nazi salute was only dropped in 1942 because it included a Nazi salute when you did the Pledge of Allegiance. An opinion piece you're going to read below if you want to do that. In God We Trust was adopted as the nation motto in 1957, and on currency, to replace e pluribus unum. Out of many, one. Out of many, we become one. Oh no, let's all be secessionists. And throw the separation of church and state under the bus. Revision 1992 of the U.S. Constitution you didn't even know existed under George W. Bush. Did it alter this or not? The U.S. Supreme Court didn't rule that you had an individual right to have access to a gun until 2008 when the District of Columbia lost the right to restrict a cop from having a gun in his house. Justice Anthony Scalia confessed that it only protects arms that would be used in a militia, not weapons of formal military usage. Isn't it great that people make laws that have no knowledge or whatsoever of the topic of the issue, and then someone misquotes the purpose of the Second Amendment to me? This is what happens when you misquote something part of our history. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.